Okay, everyone, welcome to the lightning rounds, lightning talks. We'll be going through these four in lightning sequence. Our first, and then I'll turn it over to Shinichi, who will conduct the closing and the award ceremony. So our first speaker, maybe you'd want to share your slides now if you have them, Danny. So our first speaker is Danny Kingsley, talking about embedding open in the research training process. Take it away. Oh, and
unmute and make it better. Thanks very much. And I'm very impressed that so many people have bothered to stay on. Well done. You win a prize. And that prize is hearing this talk. Okay, so what I'm talking about today is basically the progression of research. And it's changed dramatically from the single author burying themselves into books through the computer age. And now we're in an age of intense data research. And that also means that the business of research has changed as well. So we know that there was a huge emphasis on overseas students as a form of income for us, which is something that's caused issues now with COVID. But we've also got situations where the Vice-Chancellor's pay rates are through the roof, particularly in Australia, because universities are businesses. And what that means is that there is a need to do well in things like ERA, which are sort of assessment programs for excellence, whatever that means. And also we need to do well in things like our rankings, so we can apparently attract more students to get some more money so we can pay the Vice-Chancellors more. But the outcome of all of these changes is that there is now a whole heap of different information that researchers need to be cognizant of, not just in terms of the type of research that they're doing, but also the way the research actually operates as an organisation. So we can't run academia as a guild anymore. So I'm doing some work at the moment with an organisation, and I've had this situation where one of the institute directors says, well, research practice is learnt from the mentoring process. And yet the person who facilitates early career academic development program has said that some of the participants come to the course and they haven't connected with their supervisor for years. So if you're not connecting with your supervisor, the mentoring process is not going to be working very well. There are attempts to try and identify what are the skills that are needed around beyond the bench work for researchers, and this is something called the Researcher Development Framework. It was developed in the UK. It was published in 2011, and on my understanding it is under review or about to be reviewed, but you can see there's very little here that actually relates to what I'm calling research practice. It's not the ideal name, it's trying to work out what it means, what the right word is, but it does talk a little bit about publication and public engagement and copyright, but there's nothing about openness or reproducibility. And what we see is an imbalance in institutions about where their focus is. There's lots of professionalisation around teaching and learning. So there's ANU's got the Centre for Teaching and Learning. University of Queensland has the Institute for Teaching and Learning Innovation. And this study here with the OCLC noted that we've got a lot of research going into teaching and learning, but not much into research. So this area of research of research training is often met by library staff. So here's some examples of scholarly communication officers around the world in different libraries. But the problem is that when you look at the profiles that have been developed for scholarly communication and open access within the library community, they don't match the foundation skills and attributes that are used by library courses in Australia to qualify for a library course. So we've got a problem. And indeed, those foundational skills are actually just about to be readdressed with this new professional pathways program with ALIA. So we're in this kind of state of flux. So who's training the trainer? And this is something that I've done quite a lot of work on in research. And the outcome of that is that we are getting people from all over the place and not necessarily from libraries. And part of the problem is we don't have a curriculum in this area. We don't have an agreed set of skills that we need to be teaching people, and therefore what the people who are doing the teaching need to know. So I think we need to move from engagement, which is where we started with openness, we then went to enablement, but we need to go past that. We need to elucidate, you like the E's, and then embed this practice in the research process. There are some attempts to exist. If we can't agree what open science is, how can we agree what our skills are? But there are some attempts. LIBA have done this one. And there are some good models that are starting to emerge with the reproducibility networks and also other centres for transforming research. So that's a very quick rundown, my bid for it. And I hope that you all agree we need to do something about this and we can do it together. Yay!
Incredible, incredible. Very much appreciated here at the Sydney Hub. Thanks, Danny. So our next speaker is Amy Claire Thompson. Is Psychology's Low-Hanging Fruit All Gone? A meta-analysis of changes in effect size over time. Amy, you all set?
Yep.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. Hi, my name's Amy. I have just completed my 4th year in psychology at the University of Melbourne, and I'll be presenting a meta-analysis on changes in effect size in psychological research over time, broadly speaking, asking whether psychology's low-hanging fruit is all gone. Before I get started properly, in the interest of brevity, I've cut 90% of this presentation, so at the end I'll have a link to my OSF profile where you can see the rest. Over the last 5 years or so, a few different researchers have investigated whether or not effect sizes in psychological research have remained stable. Broadly speaking, there seems to be evidence to suggest that there's been an incremental decline in effect sizes in psychological research. One example comes from Felix Singleton-Thorne, who actually presented to this conference on this topic in 2019. He's found a mean reported effect size decrease equivalent to about a Pearson's R of -0.04 per decade from about the 1980s to the early 2000s. However, this is very similar to a lot of other findings in this area. However, most research in this field shares some key limitations in common. First of all, the samples have all been relatively limited. So Singleton-Thorne's work worked with over almost 300,000 test statistics, but they were derived from just 5 APA journals. So a single publisher, relatively high impact factors possibly won't generalize. And secondly, to our knowledge, so far there has been no consideration of whether or not the test statistics driving these decreases are focal tests of the paper's core hypothesis or not. So as we all know, a lot of psychology research will publish effect sizes alongside every single test statistic. It's entirely possible at this stage that decreases in effect size in psychological research are primarily being driven by things like Levine's tests or demographic data checks, those kinds of things. So in order to resolve this, I worked with a database of 230,950 test statistics extracted from 103 psychology, psychiatry, and neuroscience journals publishing on PubMed. And along with Lucy Zhang, who will actually be presenting next, I engaged in the process of manually categorizing these test statistics as either focal tests of the paper's core hypothesis or not. Broadly, the way that we did that was to compare the test statistic against the paper's title, aims, abstract, and stated hypotheses. It's a bit of a nightmare of a process. I can kind of see why no one else has tried it before. So we managed to categorize 2,150 test statistics within the timeframe that we had. Of those, 2,032 met my inclusion criteria. These were derived from over 1,700 papers across 70 journals between 1998 and 2018. I ran a multi-level regression model holding constant the focal or non-focal status of my test statistics, and I actually uncovered a decade average decrease equivalent to about a Pearson's R of 0.1 across psychology literature. This is far more substantial than any other findings so far. So what does this mean? It does suggest that effect sizes, decreases in effect size in psychological literature are not primarily being driven by non-focal effects such as Levine's test. However, the reasons for this are not exactly clear. It's possible that Baumeister, who I showed the quote from at the start, was right and that psychology's low-hanging fruit is all gone. But it's actually a lot more likely that things like ethics approval and funding have gotten a lot more complicated, and the truly huge effect sizes of the 60s just cannot be found anymore for those reasons. There have been some suggestions that power is incrementally increasing in some subdisciplines of psychology, which means that smaller effect sizes are able to reach significance, but this does seem to be very, very limited. It doesn't seem that publication bias is playing a role, because other researchers have found evidence of decreases in effect size of similar magnitudes among things like unpublished master's theses. And finally, with the pre-registration revolution and the focus on replication, it is possible that decline effects are playing a role. So in conclusion, I found a small but noticeable decrease in effect sizes each year in psychological literature. This is not primarily being driven by non-focal effects. Wow, I got through that in time. You can access my pre-registration, my data set, and my complete presentation here using this QR code or that OSF link. And all of the scripts and all of my analyses are available on GitHub here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And maybe we'll put the link to that on Slack and elsewhere, so
Sure.
you can find it. Thanks. So our third talk is Lucy Zhang, who is name checked by Amy. What predicts statistical reporting error? A meta-analysis of statistical reporting error in psychology. And feel free to take it away whenever you want.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy, and today I'll be presenting my meta-analysis on statistical reporting error in psychology. So, statistical reporting error essentially refers to an inconsistency between the reported p-value and its accompanying test statistic and degrees of freedom. They are exceptionally harmful to our practice because it limits the validity of both single studies and meta-analysis. Moreover, it threatens the reputation of psychological research as a whole. Therefore, it is important that we examine the causes of these errors to identify methods to improve practice and minimize errors. Some of the research and possible causes of these errors are simple carelessness or engagement with questionable research practice or intentional misconduct, although this has been found to be quite rare to be engaging with intentional misconduct. A recent meta-analysis found that roughly half of all articles with null hypothesis significance testing results contained at least one inconsistency for psychology literature. Therefore, our current study aimed to separate the effect of questionable research practice, misconduct, and simple carelessness by the use of focal and non-focal tests. So focal tests, as Amy has described, are tests of effects which pertain to articles' main aims and hypotheses, and they are postulated as presenting more motivations for questionable research practice and misconduct, potentially due to publication bias or bias towards more significant results. On the other hand, non-focal effects would present less of such motivations. So I essentially used the same database as Amy did. However, I will only be presenting the results on the subset of categorized data. So I fed the data to StatCheck, which is a R package that recomputes p-values from the given test statistic and degrees of freedom, and it will identify error if they don't match. For our data categorization, we achieved a reliability of 0.73, which is substantial agreement according to Cohen. So we used logistic multi-level modeling to account for the nesting structure of tests within journals. And our findings on 2086 statistical tests found that overall, 14.67% of 2086 statistical tests were misreported. And more importantly, 15.41% of focal tests were misreported in comparison to 12.61% of non-focal tests. This difference was found to be statistically significant, and it did not differ by journal. We also checked for the prevalence of statistical reporting error in our entire database, and we found consistent prevalence as the previous meta-analysis. So what does all these numbers mean? Essentially, we found evidence for higher reporting error rates in the focal tests, and potentially these may be motivated errors for more significant results. There could also be other variables that's causing the errors and is also associated with focal tests. However, we did not specifically examine this, which is why further research is required for more conclusive results. Our research was also limited by the small sample size due to the manual categorization process, and moreover, StatCheck is known to be less accurate than manual checks. Therefore, all these limitations indicate again that our results are only preliminary and future research are required for further investigation on the issue, potentially with the aid of machine learning processes to allow for a faster categorization process. And here's my link to my open registration and GitHub for anyone that is interested. Thank you again for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Same thing. I can put those on Slack and elsewhere. I believe Adam Moore is the final speaker
Yep.
of AIMOS2020.
Wow.
Winglings.
Oh my God.
It's quite an honor. It's quite
I was going to say, thank you very much. All I've got to do
quite
is try and find the right screen.
Oh boy, what a way to
Oh
end.
boy, what a way to end.
The rise of second order information structures is the title.
Here we go. The joy of Zoom. Here we go. Right. And let's click on present. That always helps. Okay, thanks very much for that. So my name's Adam Valsmer. Good morning from the UK. I guess one of the great things about this global situation, there you go, that we're in at the moment is that I can present to you all in my pajamas. So moving on. What I wanted to talk to you briefly today is about the kind of rise of information and the structures that we're building. And as we kind of try and bring together our information and be open and do open research and create open science, how do we ensure that we have those connections fully embedded in that information, in that knowledge, and just have a bit of a thought about it. So I'm going to try and condense 2 hours of working with everyone into a 5-minute thought stream rant. Okay, so with my ADHD, this is kind of a general plan, but kind of hopefully it'll come together. I've got a timer running, which will kind of keep me focused. Some of you may know something about the DIKW, which is kind of a useful way of thinking about how we manage all of our kind of different ways of building our information together. So we have data at the bottom, all our kind of really kind of fundamental pieces of facts and knowledge and so on. And then we've got information we put all together, that gives us knowledge. And on top of that, we have the kind of the applied things. We have the wisdom at the top, right? Now, what I want us to think about is our information builds best when we have those connections. All right, we get that knowledge, we can apply it to create wisdom. When we have those connections, when they can be discovered and embedded. And we're building these structures for open science, we're encoding, transporting that data and information around. How do we support that discovery, but also allow for serendipity? One of the things that kind of works really well in science is allowing us to kind of go, oh, that's interesting, right? That's kind of the most important phrase in science. Oh, that's interesting. So how do we build structures that allow these connectedness, these kind of like little connections to kind of like pique our interest, to kind of like be there on the side? So I want to kind of talk a couple of levels. There's the weft, right? So we've got all these things going on underneath. I'm going to try and flick through. Got a metabolome now. We've got an actual view over the things inside as the kind of machinery that fundamentally connects together. We've got persistent identifiers. This is my kind of my current job. I help run the ORCID consortium in the UK. We've got all these little anchors, right, that are there, but underneath them, they're no use because until we have the metadata, the kind of information about the things that they're anchoring. We have, so one of my old jobs, we have digital humanities corpus. I don't know if anyone will recognize the corpus that this is analyzing, but yeah, so we've got kind of contextualized text and topics, again, all connected together. Doing all right. So then we have these second order structures, right? We're building things on top of these kind of interconnected networks. So we have starting to build cell simulators. We're starting to build the kind of little engines, okay, that are on top of these metabolomes, on top of like kind of the underlying structures. So we're taking bits and pieces from the underlying information, and we're starting to look at the machineries and expressing those engines built on top of that. We've got research group profiles. We're pulling things together. We're using PID graphs. Just come on to that maybe. And we've got literate landscapes. We've got these ideas of the evolutions of works, of the people, and the effects and impacts from them. So this is part of these superstructures. So you probably can't read this. Did reach out to Simon for it, but I didn't quite get it. So this is from the UK funding body for superstructures, big facilities, and what they wanted to do in the purple was their actual funding, and then try and trace back the impacts of their funding, looking at things, all the information embedded in persistent identifiers. So I used to work with Ted Nelson. He's fantastic. And we go back to like, everything is deeply intertwined. Things are connected together. How do we find those connections? How do we search them? As Danny tweeted, how do we ensure the stuff that's hidden is kind of brought to the surface? How do we find all these connections, bring them together? That's kind of where I am at the minute. So what we're trying to do is kind of figure out where it's discussions, policy, and practice. The last two links are a link back to the much longer discussion that unfortunately I couldn't hold yesterday, so I'm very sorry. That's the AIMOS2020 bit.ly. And if you really want to see somebody who should have made better decisions before they were going to be recorded for all posterity, that's a YouTube link of me working with Ted's Zigzag, God, about 20 years ago now. Yeah, and I was just looking at my lovely pre-lockdown thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Heroic effort. So I'll hand it over now to Shinichi, who will conduct the closing ceremony.
Adam, can you close the...
Thanks to all our speakers. Oh, can you...
yes, sorry. Stop share, there we go. Bum, bum, bum.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for the speakers. Yeah. So I have a pleasure of closing the this fantastic. It has been a fantastic conference. So fast, the award. So we are just giving one kind of award, AIMOS2020 Early Career Research Award. We have a couple of problems. First one is we couldn't decide. The organizing committee couldn't really decide who to give this to, one person. Second problem was quite unusual. We actually had like lots of funding, which usual case we could have spent for catering and all that. So in this under unusual circumstances, we decided to give it to all the early career researchers, 17 of them. So, but hopefully this doesn't diminish the, the importance of this award. And this is recognizing all our talent in the meta research and the early career researcher. So congratulations. Yeah, to Cooper, Rob, Amy, Maya, Kai, Fiona, Gian, Lucy, and James, Robert, Julia, Aiden, Hannah, Kyle, Lisa, Rob, and Lee. Yeah, make sure this is in your CV. Okay, so I'm just gonna finish like just thanking lots of on the one slide of closing. Okay. I'd like to thank for AIMOS committee members. They were just at the AGM. We met every month. I'm gonna miss very much the monthly meeting. Thank you very much for Hannah, the president, Bonnie, vice president, Aslin, secretary, and Jennifer, Vanessa, Alex, and Matthew, and Sarah. Thank you very much. Okay, following on. I'd like to thank sort of like, invisible people, the invisible heroes, the AIMOS2020 volunteers. So Fallon, Kat, Semin, Rob, Andrew, Omid, Rob again. Thank you very much. And last but not the least, I'd like to thank my co-organizers, especially Jason, the chair, and also Alex, Sarah, Rose, Carla, and then Melissa. Thank you. So I'm gonna say just few more things to close. So some reflection, we had like wonderful different kinds of talks, AIMOS is really wonderful because it's cross-disciplinary. We got people from medicine, ecology, education, lots more medicine and psychology and law, all sorts. But I was kind of like really struck by this sort of cultural diversity, regional differences, and discipline-specific issues, which was brought by, especially talk by Sandy and also Tatsuya. And, you know, those differences, we need to really consider, you know, those sort of nuances in our meta-research. And all the, I guess, other researches, even though with all those differences and, you know, cross-discipline, we are, but, you know, the meta-science sort of like unites us all. It's quite interesting because sometimes I'm an evolutionary biologist and I can't really even talk to the other biologists, molecular biologists. They speak different languages, but it's really interesting. Meta-science is sort of like connecting all the branched sciences for this, you know, this current time. And I really, you know, my experience of being this organizing committee, it's really interesting. Like, you know, without this AIMOS or meta-science, I wouldn't be talking to Jason, who's lawyer, and also Alex, who's psychologist. And as I said, I'm an evolutionary biologist. So I think meta-science is our common language or bridges to connect us all. So that's really, really nice. So just to end my talk of the closing and see you at AIMOS 2021. I think it's gonna be Melbourne. Jason, do you wanna say something at the end?
Oh, not really. Gathertown will be open, and I think we're going to try to go, but we're going to try to get a beer, as maybe we will be a bit late. Maybe 6:10.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Alex, does Alex want to say anything?
No. No, I don't want to say anything, but thank you, Jason and Shinichi. Jason, I think, may have gotten the least sleep during this week.
It was an honor. Thank you all.